All right, in this lesson we're going to talk about recon in regards to ethical hacking. So why would I actually need any type of recon when I'm doing ethical hacking? What is the idea behind it? Well, if I were to go ahead and attacking a particular target, with permission of course, with the ethical hacking side of it, if I were doing it with permission and I wanted to be the most efficient that I possibly could when I do this particular test, I want to make sure I have all kinds of information up front ahead of time. And to do this, they either give it to me or I've got to go find it. So when you do a penetration test, a lot of times the company will go ahead and say, well, they'll set up like a white box, a black box, or a gray box test. And they'll basically say with a white box, they give you all the information you would need, such as, IP addresses and the inner workings of how the company works and the apps they're using, the OSs they're using, all that kind of stuff. All full knowledge, whereas the black box one is basically, here's our company name, see you in a few months. Sometimes it'll take a month, sometimes less, who knows. But either way, the pen tester would then have to go and gather as much information as they possibly can about the company that they're going to be doing the attack against. So in this particular case here, you got to be very careful about what's considered public and what's not public, like public documentation, things like that. Because if you start moving into active recon, that's when things get a little bit shady sometimes when you're actually dealing with doing your pen tests and legalities and all that. Sun Tzu said it best, if you know your enemies and you know yourself, you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. Now, information is absolutely king, right? He who holds information holds power. They have the power over you, either whether it be with just basic information like, let's say, something specific to your company, something company secret-wise. I mean, that could ruin your company if that information got out. So they could use it for that sort of thing. They could use it for blackmail. They could use it to sell on the black market and things of that nature. So in this case here, those are important things to remember, that knowledge is absolutely king. Data is king. So what are the ways that we can do some recon? Well, we have what they call OSINT, open source intelligence, which is passive. In other words, information that is publicly there that nobody's really trying to hide, or nothing where I have to break into a physical machine or physically send packets to the company to do scans and things like that. When I move into the active side, that's when I'm doing things like Nmap scans and such. Those you need permission. If you don't have permission to do those, then it's illegal. So doing scans with a port scanner, for instance, against a target that you don't actually have permission to is illegal. So in this case here, you got to be aware of the differences between the two. And if you have permission with the company that you're testing against, then it's okay to do the active testing if you have that permission. So passive, again, we're going to be showing you different techniques. A good example of passive would be, let's say I give you an example of this. I wanted to find information about a company, let's just say, any particular, I'll just any generic company. And let's say that I wanted to find out like specific details, like what routers they're using. Is it Cisco? Are they using Juniper for switch? What are they using for hardware devices? What are the OSs they're using there? Are they using Microsoft OSs? Are they using Macs? Are they using Linux? If so, what exact type? In other words, is it Server 2012? Is it Mac OS whatever X it's up to now? Is it Red Hat Enterprise Linux? That sort of thing. Specific details. And let's say, what about like web servers? I want to know exactly what web server types they're using. Are they using Apache? Are they using IIS? Are they doing databasing? If they're doing databasing, what type? Is it going to be MySQL? Is it MS SQL? Is it Postgre, Oracle? So specific types of those. How about virtualization? Are they doing virtualization? And if so, which is their virtualization platform? Is it VMware? Is it Hyper-V? Is it Citrix? That sort of thing. I mean, these are all really detailed information about a company. And I'm pretty sure that if you visit just their webpage, they won't have this information for you to peruse, because that's kind of stuff you want to keep close to chest. You don't want people out there to footprint you, and you don't want to give it up willingly to say, these are all the things I have. And why do we care about that? Well, in this case, it's based off of how I gear an attack, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So let's say I told you I wanted all this information about a company, but you couldn't interact with the company in any way, shape, form, or manner. You can't physically go there. You can't dumpster dive. You can't speak to the employees for social engineering. You can't communicate with any third-party outsourced companies that they deal with. You can't try to social engineer them. You can't send packets to the company, so no port scanning, no wire sharking, absolutely nothing. You can't do anything that would actually have any type of touch whatsoever with the company. Makes it a little bit difficult now, doesn't it? Trying to actually set those restrictions in place. Now, who would actually know? So how would you go about this? Well, first you have to think, who would actually have this information? More than likely, if you think about it, probably an IT administrator, system admin, right? So if you're think about it for a second in your brain, as I pause for a moment, how would you do this? Again, no touching the company, no nothing, okay? No interaction at all with the company. So now that you thought about it for a second, let's go ahead and show you a way you can do it. This is a way you can think outside of the box. So if you know an IT administrator is the guy that actually can do these sort of things or have this information, what happens if a particular IT guy decides to leave or gets fired from a company? What's the company to do next? Well, they need to go ahead and list the job. When you go to the job listing here, I'll just pick a random one. Let's go down to Systems and Network here. And we'll just pick any of these. Let's see. System Engineer. Sounds good. Let's see what we got going on. I'm just picking some at random here. Okay, so that one actually is pretty locked down, it looks like. That's good. Let's go down to another one here. Here's another one. Let's see. System Administrator. Let's check this one out. All right, here's a good one. So what do you think they're running here for web servers? It's right there, Apache. What do you think they're running for databasing? It's right there. Do you think they're using any of the operating systems that I mentioned? Looks like they're using all of them. How about languages they're using? Well, Bash, that's a Unix-based one. In this case here, it looks like they're actually using credit card information, storing that in your database, because PCI DSS has to deal with credit cards. See that? Let's pick another one. All right, here we go. How about this one? How about the specific OS they're using? Looks like they may be using Windows 2012 R2. Interesting. Looks like they might have Active Directory in there. Looks like they're using Red Hat and CentOS. Looks like they do like virtualization, and it looks like they're a VMware house. Pretty crazy, right? Scroll down a little further here. They got endpoint protection from Symantec, so we know exactly what they're using for an antivirus. It's pretty good there. Looks like they have Office in the cloud. Very cool. All right. A lot of different things that we can see. Up here, Samba. That's for Linux printing to Windows mainly. NTP, let's see, SSH, so it looks like they're using some Linux. They got some DNS, NFS, that's file share for Linux. So a lot of information we pull just off of looking at a particular web page. Just looking at someone's job postings can give you this information. And a lot of times you'll also find that some administrators will visit certain groups, pages like Google Groups and such. And what they'll typically do is if they have an issue with something they can't work out on their own, they can't figure it out, they'll ask for help on these groups, right? And usually the groups will say, well, we can't really help you unless you post what you have for your logs so we can see kind of what error you're running into. So a lot of times the administrator will go ahead and post out their logs and such right there in the forum, right on the main page, which is kind of crazy. So do keep those things in mind when you're doing any of that. So in this case here, that is what we call some passive OS int. Now, the active stuff I'm not going to do because it's against the law for me to do it, where I'm doing like port scanning and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to physically demonstrate that here. But that would be basically the opposite of what I just mentioned. Getting all that information by physically going there, dumpster diving, social engineering, scanning, those sort of things. And then we have something that we have to think about when it comes to recon is, do we want to make sure that nobody finds out that we're actually doing it? And anonymity is a big thing in this day and age, especially in the United States with the whole NSA and the Snowden debacle and all this other kind of stuff, where privacy is a big concern to people. It's becoming a big topic of discussion. And typically, there's a variety of different ways you can try to keep yourself anonymous. But one of the major ones that most people will use is this thing called Tor. And Tor usually comes in what they call a browser bundle. So if you download Tor here and click on that and download that bad boy, it's always going to be recommended that you go with their browser version because they've actually modified it in a way that will actually keep it a little bit more anonymous than a regular browsing capabilities. It's an older Firefox version is what they're using. Now, in this case here, this is what I recommend, by the way, if you're going to be doing or using Tor at all, is to be doing it this way where you get the browser bundle. So here's the concept behind Tor is pretty basic. If I didn't use something like Tor or whatever, and I were visiting a web page, a government agency or anybody really with Wireshark and ports, packet sniffing tools, can kind of see where I'm at. In other words, they can look and see where my IP address originated from. In other words, the source of who was asking for the page. Now, if I was looking and going to web pages that were, having illegal content like how to make dirty bombs or something like that, not necessarily illegal, but definitely going to be on a watch list, as it were. If I were to look up things of that nature, sensitive nature like that, then it definitely would go ahead and be cause for concern in most cases. And you would want to try to keep yourself anonymous from all that. So without Tor, it's not easy to keep yourself out of the eye because they can track where the source address came from and all that. So basically what happens in this case here is when you actually connect using this particular thing called Tor or this browser like I'm about to do here, is it will actually go ahead and connect to a bunch of nodes that are out there on the internet. And they're publicly known nodes, and they've been around for a while. And everybody knows what these list of nodes are, and it's being maintained by what they call the Tor project in this case here. And let me just connect to it real quick here. There we go. And what it will do is when it gets to this point here and it's starting to leave my machine, anytime I want to go to a web page, okay, it doesn't matter what the web page is, it will actually encrypt it 3 times. They call it the onion router because of the layers that it actually has, peeling back the layers. So it encrypts it 3 times, and when it sends it to the first node, it picks a random node. What it's doing right now at that particular stage you just saw was it was looking for a public node or computer that it actually could go ahead and join to, right? So in this particular case here, if you were to, connect out to it, it would basically go ahead and say, I'm going to send it to this first node, and I'm going to encrypt it 3 times. When it gets to the first node will rip away the first layer of encryption. It will then send it on to the second node. Now, it doesn't know where it's going, so that keeps that anonymous. And the other nodes don't know from where it came either, because it's just a random pool of proxied computers, basically, that are using this here. So in this case here, if I were to if it would go to the second node, it will then rip off the second layer of encryption. Then it will go to a third one called an exit node, and that one then will rip off the final layer of encryption and see the actual underlying address, and then it will send it on to the address that you asked for. Now, if you're not using SSL or HTTPS or encrypting your web content at all, then you run the risk of government agencies and other people monitoring these exit nodes and trying to find out by looking at the unencrypted data that's in the actual request to find out where it came from and where it's going. So if you're not using certain plugins like HTTPS Everywhere, which is what some of these are actually for Tor are actually using, then you do run into the risk of having that. So if you look here at some of the tools, I believe they're using HTTPS everywhere right there, and they've included that in the browser. So they're always trying to encrypt no matter what they do. So it's a great tool to use for it. So anyways, when it does that, and when it comes back from your request, it will then re-encrypt it again, and it will do basically the reverse of it. So you're essentially keeping yourself out of the prying eye of anybody trying to find out where you are. Okay? So in this case here, that's kind of the idea behind it. And some people will do this, and they'll think that they're browsing the internet anonymously, but there is a problem with this, because there is some things they call a DNS leak test. And there are certain ISPs, I won't name them here, but there are certain ISPs that will employ something called transparent proxying. And I think it should be illegal, but it is what it is. But essentially, even if I were to use things like OpenDNS for my own DNS stuff, even if I were to go ahead and use VPN or whatever it may be to try to use my own DNS server instead of the one from the ISP, there are some ISPs that will force you to use their DNS server. If that happens, then that basically is out of the Tor network, which means that you can be caught and seen and not be anonymous. So there are some ISPs that do that, and the way to check to see if your ISP is doing that is you can go to a web page called dnsleaktest.com. And from what I've been reading about this particular thing here, is that it will actually go ahead and do a test, and if it shows up as level 3 communications, you're good. If it shows up with the name of your ISP, that means they're using transparent proxying. Now here's what's interesting. I'm from Kyle, Texas. So what you can see here clearly is that I appear to anybody that's sniffing my traffic, I actually look like I'm from Romania at 109.163.234.9. I know that is not my actual IP address. My actual IP address starts with a 66. So in this case, I have now made myself anonymous. That is anonymity. That is Tor. I can do any browsing I want now, and it will look like whenever anybody's trying to sniff where the browsing is coming from, it will look like it's from this place in Romania, which I'm nowhere near physically. So sometimes it takes a while, but you can run a standard test for the DNS leak. And again, if you look at this page, they'll give you some information on what this transparent proxy is. And sometimes this test doesn't work in a short amount of time, and I'll close it out if it doesn't. But you get the idea. Go here and check this out, read it, find out whether or not you're still doing, if it's showing up as level 3 communication. I was aware now, apparently, that is okay. That is what it's supposed to show if it's anonymous. If it shows your ISP, that's where the problem lays. So if you've been using Tor and you think that you are anonymous, but you do this test and find out that you're not, I wanted to point that out. Okay? So this is obviously taking a little bit of time, which is fine, and we'll move on from there. But you can do your regular searching, but just keep in mind things will be slower as you do this, because now you're using like all of these different proxies to go ahead and try to find things. So you can see right there, even the Google search is in a different language. So I don't even know how to read this, man. It's crazy. But then they even have some what they call hidden services as well. And that's the interesting part, because a lot of people will, I'll ask people, usually some of the students I'll say, using your browser at home, usually it's either Google Chrome or Firefox, Internet Explorer, Safari, right, or Opera. And I'll say, browsing the internet, how much internet content do you think you are actually looking at? So these are just people like you and me who have been, since the beginning of the internet, been surfing the web, right? We've been surfing pages. So every day that you're online and you're looking at web pages, I'm asking you and those students, how much percentage-wise of the internet do you think you're actually looking at if you're using, let's say, Google? And when I usually mention that, I usually get the response of 99% or 80% or 100%, because people think of Google as the all-seeing eye of Sauron, and that they basically wrap their tentacles around everything. And you can find basically anything on the internet through Google. That's what most people think. Here's the reality of it. You're surfing 4% of the internet. Let that sink in for a second. 4% of the internet. Somebody had done a graphic of that one time. I thought was kind of interesting. It was a pretty cool graphic. It was, let's see, 4% surface web. Someone did a pretty interesting picture on that right here. So what we're all surfing, everybody who's surfing normal traffic is going to be surfing only 4% of the internet. The 96% that you're not seeing and that you're probably not messing with is something they call the deep web. And this is where anonymity comes into play as well. And there's actually a lot of recon about companies that are in the deep web that you can gather that you wouldn't be able to get through the normal web. Plus, if you're looking for specific certain things that are sensitive in nature, trying to keep yourself anonymous while searching for that is important. Now, in this particular case, when I say the surf or deep web, this is basically mostly the black market. And you can usually find it by typing in, for instance, hidden wiki onion address, because the onion addresses are basically what's being used. Okay? Now, in this case here, you have to find what they call the onion addresses, and a lot of times you'll find it on like the Reddit and all these other different things, is there'll be weird-looking names. So like this one here, see that? HDW, Wiki, Cord, all kinds of weird names there. And the ones that you're probably looking at mostly are probably going to be the uncensored ones. So for instance, notice the end of this particular address. It says .onion. Now, you're probably familiar with things like .com and .net and .org and all those kind of things. If you're familiar with those particular ones there, then those are what they call top-level domains. In this particular case here, this one is well within the actual wiki, within the Tor network itself. Let me see if I can connect to this particular one here real quick. Looks like they had the wrong link on that first one. Let's see here. By the way, what I'm showing you here, make sure you do not use this for eval, because it's not a good thing. Wow, looks like looks like a lot of these ones have no longer working. But picture it like this. Remember I mentioned that if you left the exit node, there is the ability of the government agencies and such to monitor what traffic you're going to and all this other stuff. In this case here, what if I never actually left the exit node? What if I stayed inside of Tor? Well, that's what they call hidden services. And this is where the black market basically is. I'm sure you guys saw on the news here, it's 2016. So if you're watching this video at a later time, we had a major breach of all these different, I think it was like 170 million LinkedIn passwords and usernames. They mentioned on their post there that they were selling this information on the deep web. Well, this is exactly where they're selling it. They're selling it through all of these sites here. So a lot of times here you'll see some different markets, like this one here, buying illegal guns. This one here has pure cocaine that you can buy. Some of these ones here will actually have PayPal accounts with balances. I'm not going to go to these, but you get what I'm going at here. These are legit. I've shown them before in another class. I won't do it here. But if you look at some of these are where they're selling people's credit cards that they've hacked. Okay? All these different data breaches and dumps, they sell them here on the dark web. It's crazy. But the Intel Exchange is the recon part I wanted to talk about, because this one here has intelligence gathering kind of underground. And people would say, well, this is kind of weird. I mean, is this right? Should we be doing this if we're an ethical hacker? Well, the idea that I come across with this one is, if you're getting hired to do a service to attack a company with permission, like a bad guy would, why wouldn't you actually go to the sites and places that a bad guy would go? Now, of course, there's limits to that, right? I mean, you can't physically break the law, right, just because a pen test company said you're okay with it. I'm just saying, within limits, you want to try to act as much as the bad guy as you possibly can. In this case here, these are the sites that they go to for underground intel information. And this is one of the more popular ones that are listed here as well. So it's kind of crazy seeing all these out here. A lot of people didn't realize that all of this exists under here. I mean, there's some crazy stuff in here. People are using Bitcoin left and right to buy these particular services. They're buying different things like the, what do you call it, the passports, right? All kinds of different things. There's even assassination markets on here that will take money and then assassinate people. It's insane how wrong this is. But this is it's not the whole entire 96%, but it is a very large majority is going to be here in this dark web, as you will say in this case here. So there's a lot of different things here that you can actually find, but it has to end in .onion. So if you have something that ends in a .onion address, you can kind of be assured that you're staying within the actual network. Now, some of the other ones like Silk Road that were on the news, how the FBI shut them down, plus recently they had some where they shut down a child porn ring. A lot of times those are based off of bad OPSEC. In other words, the people hosting the servers are not actually securing their servers, and they were compromised, and the FBI and government agencies found their IP addresses. But normally, if you have good OPSEC and you know exactly what you're doing for hosting your server, you can stay anonymous completely, and nobody can touch you. Nobody can find you, and nothing can happen to you, basically. That's why these still stay up and running, because people ask me, well, how is this possible? How are these able to stay up and running and they're illegal stuff? Well, because nobody can find them. Nobody can actually shut them down. It's crazy. So in this case here, that's basically the information gathering that you would do for anonymity or with anonymity. Now, Tor also has a pretty interesting other project that they do called Tails, which is a live CD that you can actually run as a live CD. And it's really interesting because it will actually clear everything in memory when you take the CD out. And if you're not familiar with a live CD, Linux does this a lot, where you can take an entire Linux operating system and run it from a DVD on top of an operating system. So on this laptop, if I wanted to run my, my Kali Linux on top of this Windows 7, I can run the entire OS of Linux on top of it from the DVD without installing it. It's crazy. Same thing with Tails. You can do that as well. You can put it on a DVD, and it will connect you basically to the Tor network, and you'll be browsing everything anonymously from a removable DVD. So if you left wherever you're at, whether it be a library, computer, or somewhere else, as soon as you remove and eject the DVD, it will wipe all traces of your existence from there. It's pretty amazing stuff. But it's called the Tor Project. It was originally created, I believe, by the United States Navy and then taken over by the EFF, Electronic Freedom Foundation. And then the Tor Project recently has taken it over, and they're basically the ones running it now. So anyways, that is one way that you can look at anonymity. There's other ways, but that's probably the most prominent that you'd be able to find. Now, as far as footprinting goes, footprinting would be basically kind of like we were talking about before when I was looking at that one website to find information about what OSs they were running and what switches and routers they were running. That's kind of what footprinting is. But I'm trying to find out basically what are some IP addresses out there that I'm dealing with. What are their subnets that this particular company is dealing with? Do they use SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol? That'll have a lot of enumeration that can happen on it. If they're running web servers, can I actually grab the banner and see what they're running? Can I find people's email addresses? Can I find people's passwords? Can I find devices, specific names of devices that are out there on publicly known information or publicly disclosed documents? Phone numbers, software, what software are they running? These are all different footprinting techniques that you can use. So let's take a look at some of the ways that we can find some of this information out. One of the ways that I always start off any type of recon is I usually start it off with Netcraft. Netcraft is a great site to check for doing any type of recon that you would do here. And if you go to netcraft.com and on the right-hand side where it says, what's that site running? That's a great place to start right there. So I'm going to pick a college because I got some friends that go to Texas State, so I'm going to pick on them for right now. So we'll say www.txstate.edu. Okay. So I'm just picking at random some names. We'll go with Texas State. They're a great college. I got some friends that go there, so why not pick on it, right? So in this case here, again, this is going to be open source information. These are things I'm not going to be breaking into Texas State and grabbing secret sensitive documents. That's illegal. But I'm getting open information, publicly disclosed information. So when I do this Texas State here, a few things that I can gather. Okay. So first off, I get my notepad out, see what I can find. So first thing I come across, got some IP address. So that's one of my footprinting, right? I mentioned before, IP addressing. So we found that out. Pretty good to go there. Let's see here. Another one is interesting is the actual address right there. Here's another one, name server. Sometimes would be kind of interesting as well if you're actually looking at the registrar. So that would be some interesting information to have. Pop that in there as well. Here's an interesting one. DNSSEC is not being used possibly because it says unknown. And DNSSEC is a way to encrypt or use digital signatures for proof of DNS queries. In other words, if you don't have DNSSEC enabled at your company, there's a possibility of phishing attempts to happen quite easily. Phishing attempts can be curbed by implementing DNSSEC. I see here that they're not using it. So pretty interesting there. Going down a little further, here's something interesting, Apache. So I know they're running Apache, and I got the exact number, which is kind of cool as well. So let's grab that. That's some good information. All right. Next, now that I have the Apache version, typically what I'll do is I'll jump in here and look for some vulnerabilities. So that particular one they're using there, they got a CVE details about it, which is a great site to go to find vulnerabilities in software. So let's go check it out. Now, usually on this site, they give it a color code number, and if it's red, very, very bad. In other words, it's very exploitable. These other ones like green or yellow or orange, not as bad, but you can see right here the 7.5 is pretty bad. Not so good there. Let's go down here. Looks like they got some possibility of a DOS. Okay, looks like the XSS is not such a big deal with the 2.6 there. Let's go down a little further. Ah, look at that. So there's one right there. Check that out. There's my Huckleberry right there. So we can see right there clear as day, 10.0, bad. Very, very bad. So it looks like we can run remote executed code here. Let's see here. Allows remote attackers to execute arbitrary code. So that's not a good thing. So it looks like Texas State is using web servers that have a high risk of vulnerability. It looks like there's quite a few of them actually on here, but not as high as that 10. So right there we can see a CVE detail specifically for that Apache version. So that'd be something interesting to put on our list. So far, not too bad of a deal, right? Got a lot of information just by looking here. We can also see they're running Red Hat, so I got an idea of what they're running for operating systems. I can see they're running Perl, so they probably have a lot of web technologies they're using. And it looks like they've always used Apache for quite some time. So it doesn't sound like they're a Microsoft house who's concerned about using IIS, so that's pretty interesting. So that's usually the first place I'll check. Another place I'll check is on Kali Linux. There's a tool called the Harvester. And this tool here, if you just type in the Harvester, it should be built into Kali. You can put a domain in that you want to search for and the data sources that you want to pull from. Again, these are public information. OSINT, open source intelligent. Do not scan or anything like that. It is illegal. This stuff here is legal. This is public information. So I'm scanning all of these places to find information about my target. Then you can do some different other things down here. I can limit my number of searches. So what I did is I did this ahead of time so I can save a little bit of time. And I went ahead and put it to this texasstate.edu, or sorry, txstate.txt. And I said all sources. So let me go over here. Let me grab that. There it is right there. So let's open that up, take a peek at it. All right, so it looks like, wow, we didn't get a whole lot of information here. Epic fail. And I think it's probably because I did it wrong. Let's see here. Let's see, BRTX state. All right. Well, looks like that one did not work as well as I had planned. And let me see how much information not a whole lot of information on it. So they must have changed that tool up a little bit. That's all right, though. That's all right. You can try this with basically any site. The basic syntax goes like this. The harvester, -D, the name of the domain that you're looking for. Make sure I spelled that right. txstate, yep. Then you can limit. In this case, I just limited to 1,000. -B, I decided to go with all sources. And then I output it to a file called texasstate.txt. I'm going to go ahead and limit this back down to 500. See if that changes anything at all. And we'll just call it txstate2. And we'll let that run. Some other tools you can use on here is you can try to find if they're running load balancers as well. And that tool is called LDB, which is kind of cool. So if you bring this up and you type in, oops, let me increase the view here. You can type in like lbd google.com and it will check to see if they're running any load balancers, because anytime you're trying to attack one server, it's always better if you have more than one server that you can try to attack. So it looks like they're doing HTTP load balancing with GWS. Let's see here. Checking there. Okay, I don't believe Google does any load balancing. Let's see. Okay, they did. Okay. So they're using difference in method. That's about it. So they are using some load balance in there. So we know there's multiple IP addresses that we could garner from that. So that's an example of a tool that you can use as well. Let's see if we got anything from that Texas State number 2 one. I doubt it. But let's check anyways. Okay. Looks like there's nothing there. Interesting. So either I typed it in wrong or they've watered down the tool since the last time I used it, but that's all right. The steps are still the same. So the harvester, put in the domain, put the limit of how many you actually want to search for, and then say exactly what you want for sources. In this case, whether it be all of them or Google or LinkedIn. Interesting stuff there. Another one I like to look at as well, I'll close that out for a second there, is, let me go back over here, is FOCA. Now, FOCA is a pretty interesting one here because this one will download public documents from a place. And if you download it, you can extract the metadata. And that's the key thing. So if I were to gather, these are just all public documents that you can download for free. And they're just admissions information and prospective student stuff. And if I extract metadata from it, and then go down here and grab that's doc format. Let's see here. Grab a PowerPoint, for instance. Download and extract metadata. As you start doing all of that, you can start going down through and clicking on like users, and it will start showing usernames. And it will also start showing you software being used. It will also show you they're running Server 2000. They're running Mac OS. Because a lot of times people don't even realize that the documents that they're publicly putting out there for public consumption, for people to download, like information about the college, or admissions, or here's a flyer for the dance party that's happening Saturday night, or whatever it may be, they don't realize, or they may not realize, that the software that they're creating these documents in, like Office, Word, Excel, those sort of things, are actually storing metadata. And it will have things like your username that you've logged into the machine with. It'll have the operating system that it was being created on. And if you print it to a printer, it'll give the printer path as well. It's crazy stuff. So use that tool wisely. But that one there, again, it doesn't break into machines for you. It's basically public information, but it's basically a metadata extractor. That's basically all it is. So that's a great tool to use as well. Another one that you need to be familiar with is just basic DNS. So if you're not familiar with DNS, a lot of times you can get a lot of Recon information off of servers that are running there. And if you know and understand what DNS does in general, then you have a better idea of what you're looking at. So here I got a domain controller that actually has DNS on it. So I was going to bring it up here. And let's see, click on that. And this is, by the way, running the Server 2012 in this case here. So this would be an example of what DNS would look like if you've never seen one, with a few different tools that are listed on here. Okay? So in this case here, I have one record, an A record. But if you right-click and look at it, there's CNAME records, which are aliases. There's also MX records, which are for mail. And there's pointer records. Okay? All right. Now, I'm going to bring up something real quick here. So I'm going to pause the video for a moment so I can bring something up so I don't have to waste time doing all of this in video time. So when we come back from the recording, we're going to look at ways that you can use something like a zone transfer to try to get some information as well. All right, so basically, I brought that up there. If I were to use DNS, these are what they call a forward lookup zone. For instance, here we got chuck.com, a little bit of roundhouse kick action going on. Let's say that I wanted to go ahead and make a name of a server. We'll call it Angelina, for Angelina Jolie. She's awesome. I love her. So let me put in an address here. Okay, I'm just picking some random address here. And add host, you'll see that it adds something that they call an A record. So an A record is basically mapping a name to an IP address, which is kind of what DNS is for. If it was a reverse lookup, pointer record, PTR, that means looking up an IP address returns a name. So in this case, I can put pretty much any type that I want in here. I can say wingnut, give it an IP address, 192.168.1.51, and go on from there. So as I add these in here, these are just basic A records. That's all well and good. Let's pretend that this Angelina here was a web server. And I wanted people to be able to contact that web server by typing in www.chuck.com. Then you would make something called an alias or CNAME. So I can say www.chuck.com right there will bring you to, where are you? Angelina. So it's pointing to an A record. Now the same thing applies as if I had mail, right? If there were a mail server from the company that I'm trying to gain information from, that would be an MX record. So if you notice that the company has an MX record, you know they got mail servers. So I can say mail1.chuck.com will point to, we'll say wingnut in this case here. So we'll say chuck.com and wingnut, hit OK. And there we go. So you can see right there is an MX record. Okay? Pretty basic stuff. So A records, C names, exchange records, all kinds of different things like that. There's also something called an SOA, which is interesting. Start of authority. This particular one is definitely going to be useful for us when we actually want to go ahead and try to do any type of, I guess you could say, information gathering or enumeration. In this case here, if I had a primary DNS server, that would be what they call writable. In other words, it's a write copy where I can make records and delete them and modify them, do what I want. Then I can make another server that is read-only called a secondary. Now the secondary server could pull the exact same records. Let's say I made another domain controller called DC2 or well, we'll say without domain controllers in this case, without Active Directory. Let's just say I wanted to make a server 1 and a server 2. Server 1 had all these records you see here, and I wanted all of these records to be sent over to server 2. And I want it to happen dynamically without me manually adding those records in. Well, to do something like that, you would actually have a zone transfer. And on the zone transfer tab, you would have to allow it to go to a server on the server list. And in this case, the server list is over here. You would put the name of server 2. Okay? That's the idea behind it. Now, this is unchecked because in Active Directory, it doesn't use the zone transfers. It uses what they call replication. So if I were to do a zone transfer, I'm basically saying, hey, Mr. Server, hook me up with all of your records, player. Let's get it on. That's all it's basically doing. Now, you can probably imagine that to a bad guy, all of these records and IP addresses and computer names are going to be handy for him when he compiles his different lists of hacking techniques that he's going to do against the company. So we don't want them to find these records. Okay? It's imperative. In this case here, a start of authority will say how much has actually happened on this DNS server with a serial number. And the secondary will look at this computer and look and see if his number is higher or lower than this number. So if this number is higher, and this is the primary, The secondary knows, hey, something happened. You put a record on there that I don't have. Give it to me. That's a zone transfer. It happens on TCP 53. In this case here, the secondary will try this every 15 minutes by default. Now you can change that. I'm just showing you the default settings. Then it will retry if it doesn't get a response in 10 minutes. Then it will expire it after a day, and it will keep it for a time to live of 1 hour once they get the record. But the key thing again is the zone transfers. So to do a zone transfer from a command line, you could use a tool called NSLOOKUP. NSLOOKUP will put you into an interactive prompt, and this can be done on any Windows client that you're using. And it will look, for instance, if I wanted to find chuck.com. Shows me the IP address for chuck.com. Okay. If I wanted to find any other servers in there, like, well, actually I don't have any other ones, but if I wanted to find any other servers, I could do it in there. But to do a zone transfer, you can say ls-d. There's a space between the ls and the -d. And then you can say chuck.com. Now it's going to say no, right? By default, it's going to say it's been refused. So basically, the DNS server says, nope, we're not giving you all of our records. I mean, you can do that with basically any of them. If I brought up a regular command prompt for my own computer and I tried this NSLOOKUP, and I tried it against Google, I said, hey, Google, give me every record you have in your DNS servers. They're going to say the same exact thing. They're going to say, no. No, player, you're not getting my records. So it's refused to transfer the zone to your computer. So that's all well and good, but what if somebody mismanages their DNS server and they come over here and they go to the properties and they say, allow zone transfers to any server. And they hit OK. Now when I come back here, run the same command, bada bing, bada boom, all the records are displayed for me. So as a bad guy, this is what you would want to try every single time for your information gathering against a company, is you always try a zone transfer to see if that will actually happen. Okay? So those are some examples of DNS and enumeration and Recon using that. Now another one you can use is for people searches. One's called Pipl. I find this one to be pretty handy. Now, I assume that you guys are probably going to be looking up information about me as an instructor, so you know exactly who's the one teaching your course and all this other stuff. So this is all publicly known information because I'm on a lot of social networks. So I guess it doesn't really bother me because I imagine you're going to look for me anyways. So I'm just going to put in my name here. By the way, I'm 43 years old, and I've lived in a variety of places like Orlando, Florida, Texas, Kyle, Texas, Maine, all kinds of places. So this, we'll see here if it's accurate or not. But if you type in your name, and I would recommend you do this to find out how visible you are on the internet, it will go ahead and search, and there is me. That's a picture of me right there. That's been pulled from my social websites, my social media sites, in this case, Facebook. Okay. A lot of different things about my career and all my training that I've done. My education, I actually do have these degrees. These are my actual degrees. These are actually places that I have lived. Pretty crazy. It's got my correct age. So it's pretty amazing how accurate this site is. Pipl. Excellent stuff. Another one is pretty interesting as well is Whois. Now, if I just did a regular Whois, let me go over to Whois itself. Now, I have a web page that I host. I'm a musician on the side, and I do have a couple blues albums out as the Blues Preacher. And I have a web page called DABLUEZ Preacher.com. Right there. So if I do a Whois lookup on the Blues Preacher, you can see over here that it doesn't give a whole lot of information. It doesn't even have my name. It doesn't have my email addresses. It doesn't have my phone numbers. It doesn't have my mail-in address. It doesn't have any of that stuff. Okay? This is it. This is what you get from Whois. Now, if you were to just leave it at that and move on saying, oh, man, I can't get any information, then you're missing out. Because there's a way you can do this to get more information. Now out there in the world we live in, there are what they call regional internet registries or registrars. Here in America, and these are the ones that actually give out addresses, information for your, or IP addresses, I mean, for your environments. Let me go ahead and change the font of this real quick here so you guys can see it a little bit better. So one of them here is in North America is the ARIN one. So they deal with North America. Then we also have another one called APNIC. And this one here would be the Asia Pacific region. Then there's LACNIC. This would be the Southern and Central America and Caribbean. I'm spelling that wrong. And then we have RIPE NCC. This one here is for Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia. And then we also have AFRINIC, which is for Africa. So these ones basically run our internet world as it a large portion of it here. And if I knew that the address I'm looking for is in North America, I would start with ARIN. But the first thing I have to do is look at the top level domains. And the people in charge of those particular deals are what they call root servers, or they're run by IEEE. I'm sorry, not IEEE, IANA. So you're going to be going to IANA's website and look at their Whois. So let's say I knew the site was thebluespreacher.com. I would come to IANA and I would find out who is in charge of what root server is in charge of COM. So I look for COM under IANA. And it tells me here that VeriSign is in charge of it. So we'll go look up VeriSign's Whois. And we'll go ahead and look specifically for the Blues Preacher. Okay, right there. So I'll say DABLUEZ preacher.com. Search that and we find out some more information. Now it looks like there's another registrar called GoDaddy that is actually running this information. So we go to GoDaddy's Whois. And we look for it again. They'll ask you for a captcha on this one. So thebluespreacher.com, they'll ask you for a captcha. Put that in, BTSY4. And let's see what we can find here. As we can see clearly here, my name is there, my old address from a place I used to live back in Winthrop, Maine, my zip code, my phone number. By the way, these are no longer existing, so don't try to mess with them because they're no longer in existence. But phone numbers, email addresses, that's quite a ways away from this little mess, isn't it? So we would have missed out on all this good, juicy information here if we didn't do it the proper way. So using the Whois in the proper way is absolutely essential, absolutely key. Another tool I like to use is MeltAGo. This one's an interesting one here. And you can look under things like domain or DNS name, actually. Let's look under, let's see. Well, let's look for domain. So what you can do is you can drag this out here, and you can look for a particular domain. Why don't we just keep looking for Texas State? Seems we already started messing with them. Let's keep messing with them. So you just go ahead and double-click inside of there. Change the name, txstate.edu. And this particular tool will let you use what they call transforms. And the transforms, by right-clicking here, will let you do a variety of different things. For instance, domain owner details, email addresses, files, and documents, all kinds of things. Let me do the DNS one here. I'm going to say, let's see. How about we just do to websites? We'll do that first. And what it will then do is it will run this particular transform, and it will find any sites that are pertaining to it. Now I can also go ahead and just basically run all of them here. And I can do this one. Sometimes there'll be some disclaimers they want you to accept. And you'll see that it will start pumping out here as soon as it gets more information that it needs. But as you start seeing here, there's the www.texasstate.edu one. But from there, I can right-click, and I can try to resolve it to an IP address. So in this case here, whoops, gotta wait for that to finish. Okay. So by doing this, let me move this around a little bit here. You can start to see that it's now starting to find things like mail servers, groups, okay? All kinds of different things. So if I went ahead and grab, let's go with this one. Actually, let's do the SMTP one. So if I want to resolve that to an IP, I can do that. And if I want to convert to a domain, or actually I'll just run all transforms. Let's see, convert to domain. There we go. And if you scroll down a little further, you'll notice here there's now some NIC cards with actual IP addresses that I can start enumerating now with my information gathering, stuff that wasn't there before. Now I can right-click and try to get IP owner details from that. These one here I'll be doing location and country to location. Now what we can see here, let's scroll out a little bit, is it found the location of it right there. And we can see phone numbers now. So as you can see, as I start dialing down with this, we're starting to see some different information, like where they're physically located at, like phone numbers. Try to map that to a URL or an email address. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. This is just 2 minutes worth of work right here. I mean, you can imagine if you wanted to enumerate the entirety of Texas State, you could find every single server running and every single IP address and every single phone number associated with each of the IP addresses. It's insane how deep this thing can get. And again, it's public information. Public information, stuff that is well known that you can use certain tools to find this information. Okay? We're not breaking into anybody's servers or anything like that. That would be illegal. But we're actually going ahead and gaining this information from public information. Okay? So that was a great tool to use. There is a free community edition from MeltAGo. You have to go there and sign up for it. And you get the community edition, which is the CE edition. And you can download it along with the Java 64-bit as well. Great tool to use. Awesome stuff. Another one that's kind of interesting is just plain and simply Google. So if I wanted to go ahead and get information about, let's say, I don't know, Chuck Norris, people would type in the word Chuck Norris. No surprise there, right? I mean, it's pretty easy peasy. I mean, everybody that uses Google or has ever searched in their life knows how to search. And they basically come on here and they type in what they're looking for and they hit search. Pretty good. I got about, 16 million some odd results off of that. Not bad. What about, though, if I decided to want to narrow down my searches? Now, Google doesn't really make this as well known, but there is a way that you can actually go ahead and modify your searches with what they call advanced operators. So, for example, if I wanted to find, let's say, the word Chuck Norris inside of a URL. You see these right here? These are all URLs. So let's say I wanted to find Chuck Norris just in URLs. I don't want anything that has Chuck Norris in the actual text here, just in the URL. To use an advanced operator, you would go ahead and do the syntax of operator colon and then a value. In this case, the name of the operator for anything in the URL is in URL, then colon, and then a value. In this case, I put quotations around it so that it looks at it as a full phrase. So in URL, Chuck Norris, don't forget, this one here previously gave me 16 million. If I search again, you can see I've dropped down my searches to about 307,000. So as a hacker, the idea is I want to get it down to as low a number as possible because I want to get extreme detail information by my searching. I want to narrow down as much as possible. That is the goal of using these operators. Now, if I wanted to find all word Chuck Norris in the text of the web page, I would then change my advanced operator from in URL to in text. Now it brings me back up to 14 million sites. So that's basically how you would use that operator. Now, there's another way that you can do it as well. Let's say I wanted to find every single document about Chuck Norris in Excel format. Excel is a Office product for spreadsheets, and they have the extension of XLS or XLSX. So if I wanted to find that, I can type in another operator called file type, colon. In this case, I can say XLS. Then do a search, and you'll notice that what comes up in my search now is no longer just web pages. They're all Excel documents. See that right there? Look at that. That's crazy. So I can modify all of my searches. Now, how does that affect the bad guy? Well, what about if they went like this? File type XLS, username, password, and email. Now, we're not going to open up some of these, but you can clearly see by some of the names of these Excel documents, and you can see by the values they're in, there's a guy's email, there's their actual password, and the PIN number for their voicemail is 1234. That's a little crazy. Scroll down a little further here. Some more information like email addresses. Here's another one. Login name GCCISD. Password is Goose1. Okay, so without even opening up any of these documents, you can see clearly that you can actually look for people's information, sensitive information, personally identifiable information. Okay, email addresses to be used in phishing scams. All kinds of information. This is how the bad guys do it. They use this information right off of Google. And there are a ton of these. For instance, if I decided that I wanted to go ahead and find information about, I don't know, let's say, how about certificates? So if you're not familiar with like certificates are used for what they call PKI, public and private key. If I encrypt something with a public key, the private key decrypts it. I'll probably go over that in another module. But the basic premise is the private key should be kept private to you, and the public key is available to everybody that wants to encrypt with it. And anything that's encrypted with your public key can get decrypted by your private key, which is why you don't want the private key to be known. But if somebody knows what the actual certificate looks like for a private key and the words therein, they could do something like this. They can say begin certificate DSA, RSA, and you can see here clearly that Google doesn't like it because we're now searching for sensitive information, so they have to put a captcha in to continue. So they said unusual traffic. Again, it's open source intelligence, but to Google, it's unusual traffic. So let's submit that. So right here, you can see private keys. Boom, right there. Insane. This should not happen. This should not happen. Okay? As you go down through them, some of these ones are like colleges. Here's a college one right there. Private key after private key after private key. So crazy stuff go on with these sort of things here. And there's a slew of these different ones that you could actually grab and use as well. So if you actually start looking down through some of these ones here, some of the crazier things I've seen, I've actually seen credit cards on here before. It's insane how much stuff is out here. Here's one for like a radius passwords from Cisco stuff, I believe. So these ones here, like if you click on that, it gives you information here. There's the enable password one right there. And there's a cracker online that you can crack secret 5 passwords with, and it's there. So these are just basic, like I said, these are just basic config files for network access protection Cisco systems. And people say, well, wait a minute, people want this out there on the internet? No, but Google has these things they call spiders that will crawl. And if you're doing any of this stuff or you're storing any of this stuff on computers that are connected to the internet, I would assume then that they can be picked up by these spiders. It's apparent that's probably what's happening here, is that people are, doing these things on public computers. If you're storing information on your home computer and you're using Office, Excel, or anything like that, more than likely, if it's connected to the internet, you're going to run into problems with Google spidering this information, and it's publicly known. Crazy stuff. So that one there is pretty interesting. They actually have a whole list of them here at something called GHDB, and be very careful about this stuff. I'm showing it to you here so you're familiar with it, but some of these things can lead you to some stuff that you may not want to get into. So there's my disclaimer. Here you can see that you can look for different things like files containing passwords, sensitive online shopping information, juicy information, things like that. And as you go down through them, people have compiled their own little, queries that they've constructed. Here's one for WordPress passwords. That's interesting because I have a WordPress site. But if you click on it here, it'll bring this up, and then you click on this Google search, and it will look for it. And again, it's found as unusual traffic because you're looking specifically for passwords. Whoops, looks like we're going to do it more than once here. ABREDG. Let's try that again. Wow, they just don't like it, do they? Either I'm typing it in wrong or something. There we go. So yeah, it looks like some of these ones here may have some information on it that is not supposed to be publicly known, such as the database password right there. Clear as day. Let me expand that open a little bit in case you can't see that. That says DB password, in case you weren't familiar with that. Crazy, crazy stuff. So these things here are how people are enumerating information. Okay? How they're doing recon on your company. One last one I want to talk about before we end this module is the world's most dangerous search engine. Can you imagine if someone were to port scan the entire internet and post the results of all public-facing systems that it finds across the entire world? Well, they do. It's called Shodan. So Shodan in this case here, ShodanHQ.com, is considered to be the world's most dangerous search engine because you can search for everything. Devices like you wouldn't believe. Let's take a look at some of the default popular searches here. So, of course, webcams is the #1 search. But this is interesting. Routers with default information. Have you ever wondered how many routers out there have it set as admin as the username and 1234 as the password? Have you ever thought that? Well, if you have, let's find out exactly here that there appears to be 11,134 of those servers throughout the world. And it looks like over here that Taiwan is the biggest offender over on the left-hand side there. But as you go down through here, you'll notice that all of these here, if I were to click on them, which I'm not going to do, is you'll find that you can log into these by using admin and 1234. And even scarier, if you go to the details, it gives you an exact Google Maps location to where that particular device is located at. Crazy. So on the map, it tells you exactly where it is. Plus down here, you'll find other information about the services that are being run on the machine. Insanity. Insanity. Crazy stuff. So that's an example of one. Some other ones that are usually on here are SCADA systems for things like nuclear power plants and space stations and water treatment and electrical grids and all that kind of stuff. Red light enforcement cameras. Insane stuff here. Insane stuff. Cisco last modify. That's always a good search there. Sometimes these ones here will let you go ahead and log directly to them without any type of authentication. Most of them will have this wireless controller one, so it won't let you do it anonymously. But in some cases, you'll actually come across some that will let you say 200 OK. Oh, look at that. See, like right here, gives you level 15 access to this particular one. And I believe you can actually start typing in commands right here. Check that out. That's insanity. That should not happen. You should not let people log into your actual router. So this one here in Zambia, wherever that's at, that particular one there is running the risk of somebody logging in and causing problems. Okay? Now for me, I'm just showing you this. I'm not going to get in there and mess around with it. That would be illegal. But this is me showing you how open this stuff is. Okay, this is crazy stuff. People's router homepage. See this right here? 200 OK. That means it tried and it got in. See that? 200 OK. It tried and it got in. That's not good. How about if you wanted to find out in the city of Austin how many people are running IIS 5.0? Because IIS 5.0 is so archaic, there's so many vulnerabilities with it. You can say city, Austin, IIS 5.0. When you look for that, you'll see here that, let's see how many we got. Looks like there's 128 web servers in Austin that are advertising that they're using IIS 5.0. See that right there? That's crazy. It's crazy. So you can see that information gathering is definitely a skill that you're going to have, and you're going to have to learn all of these different techniques to be able to be successful at doing the information gathering. And to do it passively, make sure you guys understand. I want to make this disclaimer: do not do active, where you're actually port scanning and tapping into people's IP addresses and things like that. That is without permission. That is illegal. The stuff we were looking at today was passive. It was all public documentation, stuff out there for public consumption called OSINT, open source intelligence. This is how investigators find out things about you when just using basic tools. So just using basic browsers and using basic tools that I've shown you here today, it gives you some information about Recon. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next video.